I remember the exact moment everything changed, and the stupidest part is that I didn't even realize it was happening. It was a Tuesday, which is the most unremarkable day of the week, and we were just having dinner. That's what I told myself for weeks afterward. It was just dinner with old friends, a casual catch-up on a random night in October, the kind of thing normal people do all the time. But normal people don't have their entire lives implode over a plate of pasta. Normal people don't walk out of a restaurant and leave their future lying on the table like a forgotten credit card receipt. I was normal once. I really was. I had the life you see in commercials, the one with the white picket fence and the golden retriever and the mortgage that was just a little too high but manageable. I had Emma. Emma was my wife, and she was everything I thought I needed. She was the kind of beautiful that sneaks up on you, the girl next door who grew up to be the woman you couldn't believe you got to marry. She had this laugh that was loud and unapologetic, like she didn't care who was listening. She was a kindergarten teacher, which meant she had an endless well of patience and a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the most important person in the room, even when you were just complaining about traffic or a bad day at work. I'm a commercial real estate agent, which sounds a lot more glamorous than it is. Mostly I spend my days driving around the suburbs of Denver, showing empty office spaces to people who are either about to go bankrupt or about to make a killing. It's a world of handshakes and fake smiles, and I used to love it. I used to love the game of it. But after that Tuesday, after that dinner, everything I used to love felt like a lie I told myself to get through the day.
We were at this place called the Rustic Fork, this trendy spot in the Highlands that had exposed brick and those Edison bulbs that are supposed to make everything feel warm and romantic. It was just supposed to be me, Emma, and our friends, Mark and Jenna. We'd known them for years. Mark and I played college football together back at CU Boulder, and we'd stayed close ever since. He was the best man at my wedding, and I was the godfather to his daughter. Our lives were intertwined in that way that makes you feel safe, like you have a safety net woven from shared history and inside jokes. Jenna was his wife, a sharp, sarcastic woman who worked as an attorney and always kept the conversation interesting. They were the kind of couple that seemed to have it all figured out, the perfect foil to our own slightly more chaotic household, or so I thought. We'd been there for about an hour, just the four of us, when Mark mentioned his cousin was in town. He just moved back from LA, Mark said, swirling the wine in his glass. He's crashing with us for a few weeks until he finds his own place. Total culture shock for him, leaving the beach for the mountains. He's a photographer, does all that high-end fashion stuff. You'd like him, man. He's got a great eye. I nodded, not really paying attention. I was more focused on the ribeye I was about to devour. Emma, however, perked up. She always had a soft spot for artists, for people who did something real with their hands and their minds. She was a painter herself, a hobby she was fiercely passionate about, but never really pursued commercially. She'd always said it was her escape from the chaos of a classroom full of 5-year-olds. "Oh, that sounds so cool," Emma said, her eyes bright. "What's his name?" Mark took a sip of his beer and shrugged. Jake Holden. You'll probably meet him this weekend. We're having that barbecue, remember?" I vaguely remembered Mark mentioning a barbecue. I was already mentally preparing myself for a weekend of watching football and grilling, a perfect autumnal escape from the stress of a deal that was about to fall through. It was the last weekend I would ever feel like myself. The barbecue came, and the day was perfect. The sun was out, the leaves were starting to change, and the air had that crisp, clean smell of fall in Colorado. Our backyard was filled with the usual suspects, our friends, their kids, the smell of charcoal and burning burgers. It was a scene of perfect suburban contentment. And then I met Jake. He walked out of the house with a beer in his hand and a smile that was a little too easy. He was tall, lanky, with that sun-bleached California hair and a 5 o'clock shadow that looked like it had been carefully curated. He was wearing a worn-out band t-shirt and jeans that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. He had the energy of someone who didn't have a care in the world, a sort of restless calm that immediately grated on me. I don't know why. Maybe it was the way he looked at Emma, a flicker of interest that was just a little too long, a little too deep. Or maybe it was the way Emma looked at him, a kind of curiosity I hadn't seen in her eyes in a long time. But I dismissed it. I told myself I was being paranoid.
I was just an overworked, stressed-out husband who was projecting his own insecurities onto a harmless guy who just happened to be good-looking. Mark was right. He was a cool guy. He had stories about shooting for magazines I'd never heard of, about parties in Malibu and nights in Paris. He was magnetic. I saw the way the other women at the party gravitated toward him, laughing at his jokes, touching his arm. He was a novelty, a shiny new object in a sea of familiar faces. My mind was on the failing deal, on the frantic phone calls I was getting from a client who was threatening to walk. It was a 7-figure commission, and it was slipping through my fingers like sand. I spent most of the barbecue inside, on my phone, pacing the kitchen, trying to salvage something that was already lost. Emma, I remember, was on the patio, laughing with Jenna and Jake. I saw her through the window, her head thrown back, her hand resting on his forearm as he showed her something on his phone. Probably a picture of some sunset in Tuscany. I didn't think anything of it. I was too stressed about the money. I was too worried about our future to see that the future was changing right in front of my eyes. The next few weeks became a blur. Jake, as promised, was at every gathering. He was like a stray dog that had been fed once and now wouldn't leave. He came to game nights, to dinners, to a pumpkin patch trip that was supposed to be just for the kids. He was everywhere, and he was always near Emma. He'd compliment her paintings, ask her opinion on his work, talk to her about books and movies and things I didn't have time for. I was working 12-hour days, trying to close a different deal after the first one fell through. I was exhausted and irritable, and Emma, God love her, was patient. She'd bring me coffee in the morning, rub my shoulders when I got home, tell me it was going to be okay. But I started to notice a distance, a subtle shift in the air when I walked into a room, a quiet that fell between them when I approached. I ignored it. I buried it under a mountain of spreadsheets and client meetings. I told myself I was just tired, that I was just being the jealous husband, that nothing was happening. Then came the day I came home early. The deal I was chasing had finally closed, and I was ecstatic. I wanted to surprise Emma. I stopped by the liquor store and bought a bottle of her favorite wine, that expensive Pinot Noir she only drank on special occasions. I even grabbed a bouquet of sunflowers, her absolute favorite, and a box of the fancy chocolates she loved. For the first time in months, I felt like the weight was off my shoulders. I was going to make it up to her. We were going to have a great night. I pulled into the driveway, a smile plastered on my face, and I saw it. Jake's beat-up Jeep was parked in front of our house. For a second, I just stared at it. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Why was he here? He was supposed to be at his new apartment, or at a shoot, or anywhere but my driveway. I killed the engine and sat there, the silence of the car pressing in on me. The wine bottle felt heavy and stupid in my hand. I walked up the path to my front door, my footsteps too loud on the gravel. I fumbled with my keys, the metal jangling, and as I turned the lock, a sliver of a feeling I couldn't name ran down my spine. I pushed the door open. The house was quiet, too quiet. I could hear the TV from the back bedroom, the low murmur of some show. I didn't call out. I don't know why. I just walked, my footsteps muffled by the rug in the hallway. The door to the guest room, the one I'd converted into a studio for Emma's paintings, was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, and there they were. It wasn't sex. It wasn't a passionate embrace. It was something, somehow, worse. They were just standing there, inches apart. She had a paintbrush in her hand, and he was behind her, his hand covering hers, guiding it on the canvas. Their bodies were close, his head bent down, his lips almost touching her ear. They were whispering, their words too low for me to hear. The air was thick with the smell of turpentine and oil paints. I stood in the doorway, a ghost in my own house. I saw the way her shoulders relaxed into him, the way she leaned back just a fraction of an inch, a gesture of absolute trust, of intimacy that didn't need a bedroom. It was more intimate than any kiss. It was the moment when a secret is shared in the dark, when two people become a conspiracy of one. She was in a whole other world, and I wasn't in it. "Hey," I said, my voice sounding like a stranger's.
They both jumped.
Emma whirled around, and the look on her face was a mix of guilt and annoyance. She quickly masked it with a smile, a fragile, fake thing. "Then, you're home early." Her voice was too bright, too high. Jake stepped back, his hands in his pockets, that easy smile back on his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, man, I was just helping Emma with some perspective issues. She's working on a really cool piece." He gestured vaguely at the canvas. I didn't even look at it. I just stared at her, at the flush on her cheeks that wasn't from the paint, at the way she was avoiding my eyes. "Yeah," I said, the words tasting like ash. "I can see that." I set the wine and flowers on the floor in the hallway. I didn't even care where they landed. The moment I saw them, the cheapness of the gesture, the desperation in it, hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't surprise I was feeling. It was the slow, dawning horror of a man realizing his own life has been running off the rails for weeks, and he just refused to look up. "What's with the flowers?" Jake asked, that innocent curiosity that now seemed like mockery. "I closed the deal," I said, my voice flat. "The one I've been killing myself over for 2 months." There was a pregnant silence, the weight of the unspoken, of the truth I could taste in the air, pressing down on us. Emma's smile faltered. Jake shifted his weight. "Congratulations, man," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "That's huge. We should celebrate. I was actually just heading out." "Don't leave on my account," I said, the words dripping with a sarcasm they didn't seem to catch. Jake just nodded, said his goodbyes to Emma, and slipped past me. I felt the air from his movement, smelled the faint scent of his cologne, something expensive and woodsy. When the door clicked shut, it was just me and Emma. The silence was a scream. She was still standing by the canvas, holding the brush.
She was looking at me with those big, wide eyes that I used to fall in love with. "He was just helping me," she said, a little too quickly. "How long has he been helping you, Emma?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "I don't know. Since the barbecue, I guess. He's got a great eye. He gives me confidence. It's not a big deal, Ben." "It's a big deal to me," I said, the words feeling hollow. "It's a big deal to me that my wife spends her afternoons with my friend's cousin while I'm out busting my ass to pay for this house you're painting in." She froze. Her eyes hardened. "That's not fair, Ben. You're not here. You're never here. You haven't been here in months. You care more about a commission check than you do about me. You didn't even notice I was gone." "Where were you?" "What?" she snapped, her brow furrowing. I stepped closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had to ask the question. I had to break the spell. "When I was with you," I said, my voice cracking slightly, "you were never really there. You were always looking over my shoulder, at the door, at your phone. Were you with him?" She stared at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. The paintbrush fell from her hand, clattering onto the floor. A single, ugly stain of crimson spread across the hardwood. She looked at it, then back at me. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just stood there, drenched in the silence of 1,000 unanswered questions. The silence in that room was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was louder than the screaming matches we'd had over money, louder than the sound of my own heart breaking, louder than the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen that suddenly felt like it was miles away. Emma stood there, barefoot on the cold hardwood, the crimson paint bleeding into the wood like a wound that wouldn't stop. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the floor, at that ugly red splatter, as if it held the answer to a question she didn't want to ask herself. And I just stood there, waiting for her to tell me I was crazy, waiting for her to laugh it off and tell me I was being a paranoid idiot, waiting for my life to go back to the way it was 5 minutes ago, when I was just a guy who closed a deal and bought his wife flowers. But she didn't say anything. That was the first real punch. Not a denial, not an explanation, just silence. The kind of silence that speaks volumes, that fills a room with the weight of every unspoken thing that's been rotting between two people for months. I felt my hands start to shake, and I shoved them into my pocket so she wouldn't see. I didn't want her to see me weak. I didn't want her to see that she had already won this fight before I even knew there was one to fight. My mind was racing.
trying to piece together a timeline of the last few weeks, trying to find the moments I had missed. The late nights she said she was grading papers, the weekends she spent at her studio, painting, the way she'd been distant during sex, her eyes always somewhere else, her body present, but her mind 1,000 miles away. I had chalked it up to exhaustion, to the monotony of marriage, to the natural ebb and flow of a relationship that had been chugging along for 8 years. I had been so blind, so willfully stupid, that I had handed her the keys to my own destruction and told her to enjoy the drive. "I'm going to ask you one more time," I said, my voice low and trembling. I didn't even recognize it. It sounded like the voice of a man who was about to lose everything. And maybe that's exactly what it was. "Were you with him?" Emma finally looked up, and the expression on her face was unreadable. It wasn't guilt, not exactly. It was something colder, more distant. It was the face of someone who had already made peace with a decision and was just waiting for the other person to catch up.
She crossed her arms over her chest, a defensive gesture that I'd seen her use 1,000 times before, but this time it felt different. It felt like a wall going up. "I don't know what you're asking me, Ben." "Don't do that," I said, my voice cracking. "Don't act like I'm the crazy one here. I walked into my own house, into my wife's painting studio, and found another man with his hands on you, his body pressed against yours, whispering in your ear. What the hell am I supposed to think?" She let out a bitter laugh, a sound that cut through the tension like a knife. "You're supposed to think that for once in your life, someone was actually paying attention to me, that someone actually cared about what I was doing. You're so obsessed with your deals, Ben, with your commissions and your clients and your stupid ego, that you stopped seeing me. You stopped seeing me a long time ago. And now you're going to stand there and act like the wounded husband, like I'm the one who broke something?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "So this is my fault. You're standing there in my house after spending God knows how many afternoons alone with another man, and you're telling me this is my fault?" "I'm not saying it's your fault," she said, her voice softening just a fraction. "I'm saying you weren't there. You weren't there, Ben. And Jake was. He saw me. He saw my paintings. He actually asked me about them. Do you know the last time you asked me about my art? Do you know the last time you even looked at one of my canvases?" I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Because she was right. I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember the last time I had sat down with her and looked at her work, really looked at it, like it mattered. I had been so consumed with my own stress, my own failures, my own desperate need to keep our heads above water financially, that I had let the most important part of our marriage wither away in the background. I had let her become a ghost in her own life, and someone else had stepped in to fill the space I had left empty. The thought made me sick to my stomach. "That doesn't make it right," I finally managed to say. "That doesn't make it okay, Emma. If you were unhappy, if you needed something from me, you should have said something. You should have told me. Instead, you let another man into our home, into our life, and you just let it happen." "I didn't let anything happen," she shot back, her eyes flashing with a sudden anger. "Nothing happened. Jake is a friend. He's a mentor. He's been helping me with my technique, with my confidence. That's it. You're reading into something that isn't there because you feel guilty. You feel guilty for abandoning me, and now you're projecting your own insecurity onto me." I stared at her, dumbfounded. The audacity of what she was saying, the sheer mental gymnastics she was performing to twist this into something I had caused, was staggering. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to grab her by the shoulders and shake some sense into her. But another part of me, the part that was still reeling from the shock of walking into that room, just wanted to collapse. I felt like I was drowning, and she was standing on the shore, telling me the water wasn't that deep. "Okay," I said, holding up my hands in surrender. "Okay, let's just say I'm wrong. Let's just say I'm a paranoid, insecure husband who's reading too much into a completely innocent situation. Tell me one thing. Tell me why you didn't tell me he was coming over. Tell me why I had to walk in on you two like that, instead of you just saying, "Hey Ben, Jake's coming over to help me with my painting today." Why the secrecy? That question hit her like a slap. I saw the flicker in her eyes, the brief moment of panic that she quickly masked with a carefully practiced indifference.
She uncrossed her arms and bent down to pick up the paintbrush, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't answer me. She just walked over to the sink in the corner of the studio and started rinsing the brush under cold water, the sound of it hissing against the metal drowning out the silence. I watched her back, watched the tension in her shoulders, and I realized she was stalling. She was buying time to come up with a lie. "I didn't tell you because I knew you'd react like this," she finally said, her voice quiet but steady. "I knew you'd overthink it. I knew you'd make it into something it isn't. You're so wired to see betrayal everywhere, Ben. You think everyone's out to get you. Everyone's trying to take something from you. It's exhausting." "Exhausting," I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. "You know what's exhausting, Emma? Working my ass off to provide for you, to give you the life you said you wanted, only to come home and find out you've been spending your days with another man. That's exhausting. That's a special kind of exhaustion that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy." She turned off the water and dried her hands on a rag, still refusing to look at me. "I'm not going to do this with you right now. You're upset and you're not thinking clearly. I think you should go downstairs, have a glass of wine, and calm down. We can talk about this tomorrow when we've both had some sleep." "No," I said, my voice firm. "No, we're not doing that. We're not sweeping this under the rug. We're not waiting until tomorrow. I need to know the truth, Emma. I need to know if there's something going on between you and Jake, because if there is, I deserve to know. I deserve that much." She finally turned around, and the look on her face was one of pure exhaustion. The exhaustion of a woman who had been living a double life and was finally being asked to come clean. She looked smaller than she did before, frailer. Like the weight of her secrets had been slowly crushing her, and now I was forcing her to stand up under the full force of them. She walked past me, brushing my shoulder with hers, and stopped in the doorway. She didn't turn around. "There's nothing going on, Ben," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not sure I can say the same thing about us. I think we have bigger problems than Jake. I think we have problems that have been building for a long time, and you're only now noticing because you're scared. You're scared of losing me, but you already lost me. You lost me a long time ago." And then she walked out. I stood there in that studio for what felt like hours, the smell of turpentine burning my nostrils, the fading light of the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. I looked at the canvas she had been working on, the one Jake had been helping her with. It was a landscape, a mountain scene with deep blues and purples, the kind of thing that was supposed to evoke peace and serenity. But all I could see was the chaos beneath the surface, the dark undercurrents that she had tried to paint over. I stared at it for a long time, trying to find something in it that would give me a clue, some hidden message that would explain what the hell was happening to my marriage. But there was nothing. Just paint on a canvas. Just a hollow imitation of a beautiful world that didn't exist anymore. I walked downstairs, my legs heavy, my mind a fog of confusion and anger and sadness. The wine bottle was still sitting in the hallway where I had dropped it. The sunflowers wilted and sat on the floor. I picked them up and set them on the kitchen counter, the gesture feeling pointless and pathetic. I poured myself a glass of the wine, a vintage we'd been saving for a special occasion, and I drank it in one gulp. It tasted like nothing. Everything felt numb. Emma was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book she wasn't reading. She didn't look at me when I walked in. She just stared at the pages, her eyes glazed over, her mind somewhere else entirely. I sat down in the armchair across from her, the distance between us feeling like a canyon. The silence stretched on, unbearable and heavy, until finally I couldn't take it anymore. "I want to believe you," I said, my voice cracking. "I want to believe that nothing happened. I want to believe that this is all in my head. But I can't shake this feeling, Emma. I can't shake the feeling that something is wrong, that you're not telling me the truth." She closed the book and set it on her lap, her eyes finally meeting mine. There was no warmth in them, no love, just a tired resignation, the look of someone who had already checked out of a conversation before it had even started. "You want the truth," she said, her voice flat. "The truth is, I don't know how I feel anymore. About anything. About you. About us. I've been so confused, Ben. I've been trying to figure out what I want, what I need, and I don't have the answers. Jake has been a friend to me when I needed one. That's all. But if you can't accept that, if you can't trust me, then I don't know what to tell you." I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees, my head in my hands. I was exhausted. I was so tired of fighting, of feeling like I was the only one trying to hold this thing together. "I'm not trying to push you away," I said, my voice muffled by my palms. "I'm trying to pull you back. I'm trying to save this. But I can't do it alone, Emma. I need you to meet me halfway. I need you to tell me what you need from me. And I need you to be honest about what's been going on with you and Jake." She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was softer, almost tender. "What I need from you is to trust me. What I need from you is to stop treating me like a suspect in a crime I didn't commit. I'm your wife, Ben."
I'm the woman who married you, who stood by you through all the ups and downs. I haven't done anything to betray that. But I'm telling you, something has to change. We can't keep going like this. I looked up at her, searching her face for any sign of deception, any crack in the armor. But she looked so sincere, so earnest, that I almost believed her. Almost. But there was still that nagging doubt, that whisper in the back of my mind that told me I was being played. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to trust her. I wanted to go back to the way things were before, when I was just a guy who closed a deal and came home to a wife who loved him. But something had shifted. Something fundamental had broken, and I wasn't sure it could ever be fixed. "Okay," I said, my voice resigned. "Okay, I'll try. I'll try to trust you. But you have to promise me something. You have to promise me that you'll be honest with me from now on. No more secrets. No more hiding things. If Jake is coming over, you tell me. If you're feeling distant, you tell me. We have to be a team again, Emma. We can't be enemies in our own house." She nodded, a small, tentative smile playing on her lips. "I promise," she said. "We'll figure this out. We always do." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could fix this, that we could get back to the place we used to be. But deep down, in that part of me that had watched her in that studio with Jake, I knew the damage was already done. The trust was broken, and even if she was telling the truth, I would always wonder. I would always be looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And that, more than anything, was the real tragedy. Because even if she never touched him, even if nothing physical ever happened, the emotional betrayal was already complete. She had given a piece of herself to someone else, and I wasn't sure she would ever give it back. That night, we went through the motions of our usual routine.
We ate dinner in silence, watched a show we weren't really watching, and went to bed on opposite sides of the mattress. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathing slowly even out into the rhythm of sleep. I was wide awake, my mind racing, replaying every interaction I'd seen between her and Jake over the past few weeks. The way she laughed at his jokes, the way she touched his arm, the way she looked at him like he was the most interesting person in the room. I realized then that I had been watching it all along, that I had seen the signs but had chosen to ignore them because it was easier than facing the truth. I had chosen complacency over confrontation, and now I was paying the price. I got out of bed around 2 a.m. and padded downstairs, my feet cold against the hardwood. I went to the kitchen and grabbed my laptop, opening it on the counter. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, some kind of proof, some kind of closure. I opened Emma's email, a password I had known for years but never used. It felt like a violation, but I didn't care anymore. I needed to know. I scrolled through her inbox, past the school newsletters and the spam, until I saw it, a thread of emails with Jake's name in the subject line. I opened it, and my heart stopped. The emails weren't explicit, they weren't graphic, but they were intimate in a way that cut deeper than any dirty text ever could. They talked about art, about dreams, about the things they wanted to do with their lives. They were full of compliments and encouragement, the kind of words a husband is supposed to say to his wife, but rarely does. And at the bottom of the last email, sent just 2 days ago, was a line that made my blood run cold. I can't wait to see you again. Counting down the days. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking. I felt like I was going to throw up. She had lied to me.
She had stood there in that studio, looked me in the eye, and told me there was nothing going on. And all the while, she had been sending him emails like this. Emails that spoke of longing and connection, of a bond that went far beyond a simple mentorship. The betrayal was complete. The trust was shattered, and I was left standing in the dark, alone, with nothing but the bitter taste of a truth I never wanted to know. I didn't go back to bed that night. I sat on the couch in the living room, staring at the wall, my mind a blank void of shock and pain. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I was too numb for tears. I just sat there, watching the clock tick away the hours, waiting for the sun to rise on a life that no longer made sense. When Emma came downstairs in the morning, she found me there, pale and hollow-eyed, the laptop open on the coffee table. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice full of concern that felt like a knife in my chest. "I know," I said, my voice flat and emotionless. "I know about the emails." She froze, her face draining of all color. And in that moment, I knew. I knew everything. There was no coming back from this. The world didn't stop spinning when she finally spoke. That was the cruelest part. The sun still rose, the birds still chirped outside the window, and somewhere out there, people were going about their ordinary lives, unaware that mine had just collapsed into a pile of rubble at my feet. I sat there on the couch, my hands clasped together so tightly that my knuckles had gone white, and I watched the woman I had loved for nearly a decade transform into a stranger right before my eyes. The mask she had been wearing, the careful, composed facade of the loving wife, had slipped, and underneath it was someone I didn't recognize, someone who had been living a secret life while I was out there killing myself to provide for a future she had already abandoned. Emma didn't try to deny it. She didn't try to explain it away or make excuses. She just stood there in the doorway of the living room, her hair still messy from sleep, her face pale and drawn, and she looked at me with something that almost resembled relief, like the weight of her lies had finally become too heavy, and she was grateful to have someone else carry them for a while. That look, that quiet, resigned acceptance, was what finally broke something inside me. I had hoped, in some small, desperate corner of my heart, that I was wrong, that I had misunderstood the emails, that they were just friendly banter between two people who shared a passion for art. I had hoped that she would laugh and tell me I was being ridiculous, that I was overreacting, that she would prove me wrong and we could go back to the way things were. But the way she stood there, the way she didn't even try to fight, told me everything I needed to know. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It felt like the only question that mattered, the only answer that could possibly make sense of the chaos in my head. "How long has this been going on?" She walked over to the armchair across from me and sat down slowly, like her legs were about to give out. She didn't look at me. She stared at her hands, twisting them in her lap, and I could see her struggling to find the words. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating, and I wanted to scream at her to just say it, to just rip the Band-Aid off and let me bleed out. But I didn't. I just sat there, waiting, because I had already waited too long. I had been waiting for months, oblivious to the truth that was staring me in the face, and I wasn't going to let her stall anymore. "It started at the barbecue," she finally said, her voice soft and trembling. "The first time we met. There was just something about him, Ben. Something that drew me in. He was so different from you, so attentive, so interested in what I had to say. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years."
And I know that sounds terrible, and I know it doesn't excuse anything, but it's the truth. I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips, hollow and sharp. So what, you just fell for him on the spot? You just looked at him and decided that our marriage wasn't worth fighting for anymore? That's how little I meant to you? No, she said, finally looking up at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. That's not how it happened. It wasn't like that. It was gradual. It was little things at first. He'd compliment my paintings, ask me questions about my process, listen to me talk about things I was passionate about. He made me feel like I was interesting, like I mattered. And you had stopped doing that, Ben. You had stopped seeing me. And I was so lonely, so desperately lonely, that I didn't know what to do. I shook my head, the words hitting me like a physical blow. You could have talked to me. You could have told me you were lonely. You could have given me a chance to fix it, to be better. But you didn't. You chose to go outside our marriage instead of trying to fix what was broken inside it. That's not on me, Emma. That's on you. I know, she whispered, a single tear rolling down her cheek. I know it's on me. And I'm not trying to blame you. I'm trying to explain. I'm trying to make you understand why I did what I did, even though I know it's wrong. I was so lost, Ben. I was so lost. And Jake was there, and he made me feel found. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't plan it. It happened. It just happened, I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. You don't just fall into an emotional affair, Emma. You don't just accidentally send dozens of emails to another man, telling him you can't wait to see him again. You made choices. You made 1,000 choices every single day to put him before me. And now you're standing here, telling me it just happened, like it was some kind of accident, like you were just a passive participant in your own betrayal. She flinched at the word, and I felt a grim satisfaction at the sight. I wanted her to hurt. I wanted her to feel even a fraction of the pain that was tearing me apart inside. But even as I thought that, I felt the guilt creeping in, the part of me that still loved her and wanted to protect her from the consequences of her own actions. It was a sick, twisted feeling, loving someone who had just shattered your heart, and I hated myself for it. Did you sleep with him? I asked, the question hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. I need to know. I need to know everything. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see the war playing out on her face, the battle between her instinct to protect herself and her desire to finally come clean. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. No, I didn't sleep with him. I swear to you, Ben, nothing physical ever happened between us. We talked. We spent time together. We shared things with each other that we hadn't shared with anyone else. But we never crossed that line. It was emotional. It was intimate. But it wasn't physical. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But the trust was already gone, shattered into a million pieces on the floor. And I didn't know if I could ever put it back together. The fact that she hadn't slept with him didn't make it any better. In some ways, it made it worse, because it meant she had invested so much of herself into this relationship, so much of her heart and her soul, that she had convinced herself it was okay, because it wasn't physical. She had justified her emotional infidelity by drawing an arbitrary line, and in doing so, she had given herself permission to fall in love with someone else. Did you love him? I asked, my voice cracking. Did you love him, Emma? She didn't answer right away. She just sat there, staring at her hands, and I knew the answer before she even opened her mouth. The silence was all the confirmation I needed, but I needed to hear her say it. I needed to hear the words come out of her mouth, to make it real, to make it final. I don't know, she finally said, her voice shaky and uncertain. I don't know if it was love. I think it was the idea of love.
It was the feeling of being wanted, of being desired, of being seen. And I hadn't felt that in so long, Ben. I hadn't felt that with you in so long. It was intoxicating. It was addictive. And I didn't know how to stop it. I stood up abruptly, the sudden movement making her jump. I couldn't sit there anymore. I couldn't just sit there and listen to her romanticize her betrayal, to paint it as some kind of tragic love story that had just happened to her, like she was a character in a novel, and not my wife, not the woman I had promised to spend my life with. I started pacing the room, my hands raking through my hair, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. I felt like I was going to explode, like the anger and the hurt and the confusion were all building up inside me, and I didn't have anywhere to put them. I can't do this, I said, more to myself than to her. I can't just sit here and listen to this. I can't be in this house with you right now. I need to leave. I need to get out of here. Ben, please, she said, her voice desperate. Please don't leave. We need to talk about this. We need to figure out what happens next. No, I said, spinning around to face her. No, you don't get to do that. You don't get to pull me back in just because you're scared of being alone. You don't get to have your affair and your husband too. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. She stood up, her arms reaching out toward me, and I flinched away from her touch. I couldn't let her touch me. I couldn't let her comfort me when she was the one who had caused all this pain. Where are you going? She asked, her voice trembling. I don't know, I said, grabbing my keys off the hook by the door. I don't know where I'm going. I just know I can't be here. I can't look at you right now. I can't look at this house, at all the memories we built here, and pretend like everything is going to be okay. Because it's not. It's never going to be okay again. I walked out the door, slamming it behind me, and I didn't look back. I got in my car and started driving, not knowing where I was headed, just needing to get away. The streets of Denver blurred past me, familiar landmarks that suddenly felt alien, like I was seeing them for the first time. I drove for what felt like hours, winding through the suburbs, past the houses of people who were living their ordinary lives, who had no idea that mine had just fallen apart. I ended up at a bar on the outskirts of town, a divey place with neon signs and a sticky floor, the kind of place where nobody asked questions. I sat at the counter and ordered a whiskey, and I drank it slowly, letting the burn of it numb the pain that was eating me alive. I thought about all the years we had spent together, all the laughter and the tears and the quiet moments that had seemed so precious at the time. I thought about our wedding day, the way she had looked at me with so much love in her eyes, the way she had promised to stand by me through thick and thin. I thought about all the times I had sacrificed for her, all the late nights and the missed opportunities, all the things I had given up because I thought it was building a future for us. And now, all of it felt like a lie. Every moment, every memory, was tainted by the knowledge that she had been falling out of love with me, while I was too busy trying to make ends meet to notice. I stayed at that bar until closing time, drinking until the edges of my vision blurred and the pain in my chest became a dull, distant ache. When I finally stumbled out into the cold night air, I knew I couldn't go home. I couldn't face her, not now, not like this. So I called Mark. I didn't even think about it. I just pulled out my phone and dialed his number. And when he answered, I could hear the sleep in his voice. Ben? It's 2 a.m, man. What's going on? I need a place to stay, I said, my voice thick and slurred. I can't go home. I can't be in that house right now. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Mark's voice, suddenly alert. What happened? Is Emma okay? Emma's fine, I said, the words bitter on my tongue. Emma's great. Emma's been having a fucking affair with your cousin, and I just found out about it. So no, Mark, Emma's not okay. None of us are okay. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could almost hear the gears turning in Mark's head, the pieces clicking into place,
the realization that his cousin had been the one to tear apart his best friend's marriage. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with guilt. "Ben, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I swear to God, I had no idea." "I know," I said, the fight draining out of me. "I know you didn't. But right now, I just need a place to crash. I'll explain everything tomorrow. I can't be alone right now." "Come over," he said, his voice firm. "I'll have the guest room ready for you. You can stay as long as you need." I hung up the phone and drove to Mark's house, my head swimming with alcohol and exhaustion. When I got there, he was waiting on the porch, his face etched with concern. He didn't say anything. He just put a hand on my shoulder and led me inside. And I was grateful for the silence. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to explain.
I just wanted to sleep, to escape into a world where none of this had happened, where my wife still loved me and my life still made sense. But even as I lay down in the guest bed, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, I knew I couldn't escape. The truth was out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to wake up and face it. And when I did, I would have to make a choice that would determine the rest of my life, a choice that would either save my marriage or destroy it forever. And I had no idea which one I was going to make. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and the taste of regret in my mouth. Mark was already in the kitchen, making coffee, and the smell of it was both comforting and nauseating. I sat down at the table, my head in my hands, and he slid a cup of coffee in front of me without a word. I took a sip, letting the warmth spread through my chest, and I tried to piece together the fragments of the night before. "I need to know what happened," Mark said, sitting down across from me. "I need to know what Jake did, because if he had anything to do with this, I'm going to fucking kill him." I looked up at him and I saw the anger in his eyes, the guilt that he was carrying for having brought his cousin into our lives. And I realized, in that moment, that I wasn't the only one who had been betrayed. Mark had trusted Jake, had welcomed him into his home, had vouched for him to his friends. And Jake had repaid that trust by destroying the marriage of his best friend. The betrayal was layered, complex, and it cut deep. "He didn't force her," I said, my voice flat. "She made her own choices. She chose to have an emotional affair with him. She chose to lie to me about it. And I don't know if I can ever forgive her for that." Mark nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "What are you going to do?" I stared into my coffee, the dark liquid swirling like the chaos in my mind. "I don't know," I said. "I honestly don't know."
I stayed at Mark's for 3 days. 3 days of sleeping on a mattress that wasn't mine, drinking coffee that tasted like guilt, and staring at the ceiling while my mind replayed every moment of the last few months on an endless, torturous loop. Mark and Jenna were incredibly kind, the kind of friends who don't ask too many questions, but make sure you know they're there. Jenna brought me food I didn't eat and offered to talk when I was ready, and I appreciated it more than I could ever express. But I wasn't ready. I wasn't even close to ready. I was still in the shock phase, that strange, numbing purgatory where the pain is so immense that your brain just shuts down and refuses to process it. I felt like I was walking through a dream, or maybe a nightmare, and at any moment I would wake up and find Emma beside me, her hand on my chest, her breath warm on my neck, and everything would be fine. But I didn't wake up. I just kept living in this gray, hollow version of reality where my wife had fallen in love with someone else, and I was left to pick up the pieces of a life I no longer recognized. On the 4th day, I went back home. I didn't call ahead, I didn't text. I just drove there, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached, and I walked through the front door like I was entering a war zone. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy and oppressive, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I found Emma in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of cold tea in front of her. She looked up when I walked in, and I saw the relief flood her face, quickly followed by fear. She didn't know what I was going to say. She didn't know if I was coming back to fight or to leave for good. And honestly, neither did I. "Ben," she said, her voice soft and tentative. "I'm so glad you're back. I've been so worried about you. I didn't know where you were, if you were okay, if you were ever coming home." I didn't sit down. I just stood there in the doorway, my arms crossed over my chest, my eyes fixed on her. "I was at Mark's," I said, my voice flat. I needed some time to think, to figure out what I wanted to do. She nodded, her hands wrapped around the mug like it was a lifeline. "I understand. I know I hurt you. I know I broke your trust. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I want to try, Ben. I want to try to fix this. I want to go to counseling, to do whatever it takes to rebuild what we had. I love you. I've always loved you. I just got lost for a while." The words hung in the air, and I wanted to believe them. God, I wanted to believe them. But the cynical part of me, the part that had been burned and broken, couldn't help but wonder if she was only saying this because she had been caught. If Jake hadn't been exposed, if I hadn't found those emails, would she still be in the studio with him right now? Whispering secrets and painting dreams? Would she still be telling him she couldn't wait to see him again? The thought made my stomach churn, and I had to look away from her to keep from screaming. "I don't know if counseling can fix this, Emma," I said, my voice cracking. "I don't know if anything can fix this. You didn't just cheat on me. You lied to me. You looked me in the eye and told me there was nothing going on, and you let me believe it. You let me think I was crazy for even suspecting anything. And that's not something you can just apologize for and make go away." She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor, and she walked toward me, her hands outstretched. I stepped back, a reflex I couldn't control, and the hurt in her eyes was almost enough to break me. Almost. "I know I lied," she said, her voice trembling. "And I know that's unforgivable. But I'm asking you to try. I'm asking you to give us a chance. We've been through so much together, Ben. We've built a life together. Don't throw it away because of a mistake I made." "A mistake?" I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. "Emma, you didn't make a mistake. You made a choice, 1,000 choices, every single day to put him before me. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern. and I don't know if I can ever trust you again." She started crying then, the tears streaming down her face, and I felt a sickening mix of satisfaction and guilt. I wanted her to hurt. I wanted her to feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling. But I also hated seeing her cry. I hated that I still loved her, still wanted to protect her, even after everything she had done. It was a cruel irony, and I didn't know how to escape it. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please don't give up on us. I'll do anything. I'll cut off all contact with Jake. I'll delete his number, block him on everything. I'll go to therapy, by myself, with you, whatever you need. Just please don't leave me. I can't lose you, Ben. You're my whole world." I stared at her, this woman I had loved for nearly a decade, and I saw the desperation in her eyes. I saw the fear, the regret, the genuine desire to make things right. And for a moment, I almost gave in. I almost said yes. I almost walked over to her, wrapped my arms around her, and told her that everything was going to be okay. But then I remembered the emails. I remembered the way she had stood in that studio with him, her body pressed against his, her eyes closed in bliss. I remembered the way she had looked at me when I walked in, the annoyance flickering across her face before she could hide it. And the anger came rushing back, hot and fierce, drowning out the love and the pity and the desperate need to hold on to something that was already gone. "I need some time," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need some time to figure out what I want. I can't just make a decision right now. I can't just forgive you and pretend like none of this happened. That's not how it works." She nodded, wiping the tears from her cheeks. "I understand. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. I'll be waiting. I'm not going anywhere, Ben. I promise." I walked past her, up the stairs, and into the bedroom we had shared for so many years. It smelled like her, like lavender and vanilla and something else I couldn't quite place. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, and I let myself feel the full weight of what had happened. I let myself grieve. I let myself mourn the life I thought I had, the future I thought we were building, the woman I thought I knew. And when I was done, when there were no tears left to cry, I made a decision. It wasn't a final decision, not yet, but it was a step toward figuring out what I wanted, what I needed, and whether or not Emma still had a place in my life. The next few weeks were a blur of awkward silences and forced conversations. Emma tried so hard to make things right. She cooked my favorite meals, left little notes on the bathroom mirror, and initiated intimacy in ways she hadn't in years. But every gesture, every kind word, felt like a performance. It felt like she was trying to convince me, and maybe herself, that everything was okay. And it wasn't okay. It wasn't even close to okay. I started spending more time at work, throwing myself into deals with a fervor that surprised even me. I was closing more sales than ever before, making more money, but it all felt hollow. What was the point of building a future if the person I was building it with had already checked out? What was the point of working so hard if there was no one at home who appreciated it? I felt like a machine, going through the motions, producing results, but with no soul behind the effort. One night, about 3 weeks after I had come back home, I found myself at a bar downtown. I had been at a networking event, shaking hands and smiling, pretending to be the confident, successful businessman everyone thought I was. But the mask had slipped as soon as I walked out the door, and I needed a drink. I needed to feel something other than the hollow emptiness that had taken up residence in my chest. I ordered a whiskey and sat at the bar, nursing it slowly, watching the crowd around me. There were couples laughing, friends celebrating, people living their lives without a care in the world. And I hated them.
I hated their happiness, their normalcy, the simple joy they seemed to find in each other's company. I was bitter and angry, and I didn't know how to stop. That's when I saw her. She was sitting at a table in the corner, alone, a glass of wine in front of her. She was beautiful, with dark hair and piercing green eyes, and there was something about the way she carried herself that drew me in. She looked sad, too, like she was carrying her own weight of sorrow and regret. I don't know what came over me. I don't know why I stood up and walked over to her table. Maybe I was looking for a distraction. Maybe I was looking for someone to share the burden of my pain. Maybe I was just so desperate to feel something other than the constant gnawing ache in my chest that I was willing to do anything. "Is this seat taken?" I asked, my voice rough from the whiskey. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine, and for a moment she didn't say anything. Then she smiled, a sad, knowing smile, and gestured to the empty chair across from her. "It is now," she said. I sat down and we started talking. Her name was Olivia, and she was a graphic designer, recently divorced, still trying to piece her life back together. She had been married for 7 years, had caught her husband cheating with his secretary, and had walked away with nothing but her dignity and a stack of therapy bills. She understood my pain in a way that Emma never could, because she had lived it. She had been where I was, sitting in the wreckage of a life that had been destroyed by someone else's selfishness. And as we talked, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. I felt understood. I felt seen. I felt like someone actually got what I was going through. We talked for hours, the bar emptying around us until we were the only ones left. I told her about Emma, about Jake, about the emails and the studio, and the betrayal that had shattered my world. And she listened. She didn't judge. She didn't offer unsolicited advice. She just listened, her green eyes fixed on me, her hand occasionally reaching across the table to touch mine. It was innocent, that touch, a gesture of comfort and solidarity, but it meant more to me than any of Emma's desperate attempts to win me back. It meant someone cared. Someone saw me. Someone was willing to sit in the dark with me and hold my hand while I figured out how to find the light. When the bartender finally kicked us out, we stood outside in the cold night air, our breath forming clouds in front of our faces. She looked at me, her head tilted to one side, and she smiled again. "Thank you," she said, "for tonight. I didn't realize how much I needed to talk to someone who understood." "Thank you," I said, my voice hoarse. "I needed it too." She reached out and touched my arm, a brief electric contact that sent a shiver down my spine. "I know this is probably a bad idea," she said, her voice soft. "I know we're both broken, both trying to heal. But if you ever need someone to talk to, someone to just sit with you in the dark, you have my number. Use it." She walked away, disappearing into the night, and I stood there, watching her go, my mind racing. I knew I was walking a dangerous line. I knew that what I was feeling, this connection, was nothing more than a desperate attempt to fill the void that Emma had left. But I didn't care. I was so tired of being strong, so tired of trying to fix something that felt unfixable. I wanted to feel alive again, even if it was just for a moment. And Olivia made me feel alive. She made me feel like there was still a future, still a chance at happiness, even if it wasn't the future I had planned. I went home that night and crawled into bed beside Emma, who was already asleep. I stared at the ceiling, the conversation with Olivia playing on a loop in my head, and I realized that I had crossed a line. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally. I had given a piece of my heart to someone else, just like Emma had done with Jake. I had become the very thing I hated. I had become a cheater, and I didn't know how to stop. The next morning, I woke up to find Emma's phone on the nightstand, a notification lighting up the screen. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew it was a violation of her privacy, a betrayal of the fragile trust we were trying to rebuild. But I couldn't help myself. I reached over and picked it up, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a text from an unknown number, and when I opened it, the words made my blood run cold. I miss you. I can't stop thinking about you. Please tell me when we can see each other again. I didn't recognize the number. It wasn't Jake's. It was someone else. Someone new. And in that moment, I realized that Emma had never stopped. She had just gotten better at hiding it.
প্রাণের বন্ধু দিল আঘাত আমার